Thank you. Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Colchester in his excellent and passionate contribution. And of course this is such a sensitive and important subject, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Members for Edisbury and Colchester for securing this debate at this very important week, and for speaking about their own personal experiences. And I also want to pay tribute to the very brave Honourable Members who've shared their personal experiences with such eloquence today. My honourable friend, the member for Lewisham Deptford, and the honourable member for North Ayrshire and Arran, and my very good honourable friend, the member for Washington and Sunderland West. In Hull, the levels of stillbirth and neonatal deaths are higher than the national average, and there is so much more, as we've heard already, that needs to be done. But I want to put on record my tribute to the excellent work of the Hull and East Yorkshire SANS Group in supporting parents, and I also want to pay tribute to the Lullaby Trust under the inspirational leadership of Francine Bates. But today I want to go back to the issue which the Honourable Member for Edisbury talked about at the beginning of her contribution, which was about injustice. And we know that the trauma of the loss of a baby can also be compounded by what happens next. And I want to tell you the story of my constituents, Mike and Tina Trohill, who came to see me to tell me about what had happened to them. They explained that their baby William had very sadly died in 1994, a long time ago. And they'd been told at the time that when he was cremated, there would be no ashes. Many, many years later, Tina discovered that William's ashes had in fact been retained, never been returned to her, and somebody had scattered them without her knowledge. This was very sad and bewildering. Why would somebody do this? And it soon became very apparent that this was not a very sad one-off incident. Tina has worked relentlessly in Hull and the wider Hull area to help many other families who have also discovered that their baby's ashes were either not returned to them, were scattered without their knowledge, or there's still a mystery as to where the ashes are now. She set up the local Action for Ashes group. It now has 420 members. She's discovered that many families were told that there would be no ashes when the baby was cremated. Many families were told this by clinicians and nurses in the NHS. Many families now have discovered that those ashes were scattered. Over 50 sets of ashes are still held by the cooperative funeral service and have not been returned to families. There are cases coming to light now where babies appear to have been transported to the crematorium without the use of an undertaker. And Tina herself has helped families submit forms to the local authority seeking information about what happened to those babies. She's submitted over 50 such requests so far. And it's quite clear now that this has not just happened in Hull, it's happened up and down the country. It's happened in Scotland and it's happened in Shrewsbury. And in Shrewsbury, the local authority, rightly so, held a local inquiry to find out what had happened and to get those answers for local families. So, in Hull, Tina and I decided we would go and see Hull City Council and ask for an independent inquiry, just as they'd had in Shrewsbury. And whilst initially sympathetic, the council decided no, they wouldn't be willing to hold such an inquiry. We challenged them on this. We said that it wasn't okay for the local authority just to investigate itself. It needed to be done in an open and transparent way. But no, they said they weren't willing to have that local inquiry. So I raised it with the previous Prime Minister, David Cameron, and I asked him what he thought about it. And he expressed to me that he thought actually it must be absolutely dreadful not to know what's happened to your baby's ashes and something should be done. Eventually, Tina and I went to see the then Justice Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Surrey Heath. And I think he was genuinely moved by Tina's plight and hearing about the very many families in Hull who still didn't know what had happened. Tina made it very clear to the Justice Secretary what she wanted to see was a local inquiries for those families in Hull to get the answers as to what had happened. And on the 10th of May, the Justice Secretary wrote on behalf of himself, the Secretary of State for Health and the Secretary of State for the Department of Communities and Local Government and said this: I am pleased to be able to tell you that my fellow Secretaries of State at the Department of Health and the Department of Communities and Local Government have agreed with me that there is a need for an historic investigation into the practices relating to infant cremations in the Hull area, and we have today jointly written to the Chief Executive of Hull City Council asking him to commission this. Well, you can imagine we were delighted to have that and to have 3 Secretaries of State acknowledge that the families in Hull deserved to know what had happened. That was excellent news, and I was delighted that the Secretary of State decided to do that. However, there were 2 issues that I think, rightly so, that remained of concern. One was the jurisdictional point. It wasn't just about the local council who had responsibility for the crematoria. It was also about the National Health Service and the role that they'd played and the training needs and anything else that might come out of any inquiry. So it was important that health were involved in this. There was obviously an issue about private funeral directors and how they would be compelled to be part of any investigation. So it was quite clear there was some issues that needed to be addressed. And the other issue, which I did have quite a lot of sympathy with, was about the cost of holding an independent inquiry. We know that inquiries can be expensive, and we also know that local councils are under enormous financial pressure at the moment. So I supported Hull City Council in returning to the Department of Justice and asking them for clarification and assistance on those 2 points, jurisdiction and whether there was any financial help available. That all seemed to be going well. I thought they were genuine issues that the department would deal with. However, on the 26th of September 2016, the new Justice Secretary wrote to Hull City Council saying she thought there was now no longer any need for an inquiry. This letter was not copied to me or my constituent, and I only became aware of it because the Chief Executive of Hull City Council sent a copy to me. I have to say, on behalf of my constituents and the many families in Hull, I am absolutely furious that a decision made by 3 Secretaries of State was just completely overturned with no consultation or any kind of attempt to consult with me or my constituent or indeed the Action for Ashes group in Hull. My constituent, as you can imagine, is devastated. And when I read the letter from Hull City Council, it said that they'd carried out investigations, they were satisfied that everything had been done as it could be done. Reading the letter, it was also clear that they hadn't really engaged fully with the problems around the NHS and the funeral directors, and they certainly hadn't engaged fully with the families. Now, in recent years, we have become very much more an open country, and we are less willing to take the word of trust of authority figures, and organisations left to investigate themselves rarely see the need for independent scrutiny of their actions. You only have to look at cases like Hillsborough. And organisations who investigate themselves almost always find nothing much wrong and no one answerable for any error that is ever owned up to. Nothing to see here, go away, move on, could be the motto of that culture. Now, with nearly 100 families in Hull coming forward, they are not just going to go away and accept that they will not get the answers to the questions they're asking about the ashes of their deceased babies and what happened. A proper independent inquiry run from outside Hull City Council, as they had in Shrewsbury, to ascertain if whether or not more can be learnt is at the least they deserve. And without learning the lessons of the past, there will be less confidence on whether measures proposed by ministers to reform practices at crematoria will be enough. And I really do not understand why the Secretary of State for Justice what she had to gain by closing down the prospect of proper independent scrutiny of what went wrong in Hull. And in this week in particular, I would just ask the Minister to put himself in the shoes of those families in Hull who want answers and justice, and there are three key demands. First of all, I believe my constituent ought to receive an apology from the Secretary of State for Justice, and I think she ought to give her the courtesy of a personal meeting, just as the previous Secretary of State did. And thirdly, I think the independent investigation into what happened to the baby ashes in Hull of over 100 families should be reinstated forthwith, with funding from the government to ensure that this inquiry can go ahead.